This video is personal to me. My mother works in an office and I grew up watching her being judged by her appearance. This isn't just a story for views, it's based on real experiences so that you can learn from them and avoid repeating other people's mistakes. All names, companies and addresses here are fictional. The point is not in them, but in the situation.
I think you're looking for the service entrance, the girl said, pointing behind her without meeting my eyes. She was maybe 20, with a clipboard and a shaky smile, part of the student volunteers running check-ins. I didn't move, just blinked at her, slow and steady, while a pair of parents in silk and tuxedos breezed past me into the main ballroom. I was wearing a clean navy suit, nothing designer, nothing frilly, just something that fit and didn't demand attention. My shoes were sensible. My bag was leather but worn. I hadn't bothered with makeup beyond some eyeliner and lipstick. It wasn't that kind of day. It was Chris's day. I came early, like I always did. I came proud. But I didn't come to perform. And yet there I stood, boxed out by a 20-year-old with shaky nerves and assumptions baked into her bones. "Ma'am," she repeated, this time with a fake sweetness. "Catering is setting up around the back." I smiled with the corner of my mouth. Not big, not enough to comfort her, just enough to keep myself from spitting something I'd regret. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. 97% of people listen to stories like this without ever hitting subscribe or liking the video. It takes you a second, but for our team, it means everything. If this moment hit you, if you've ever been mistaken for less, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. Now back to it. I didn't correct her. I didn't flash credentials. I just nodded, walked in through the side door, and let her watch me disappear past security like I belonged, which, of course, I did. Inside the reception hall, it looked like a luxury hotel lobby on steroids. Mahogany walls, crystal chandeliers, champagne towers rising like glass waterfalls. Every table had a linen cover and embossed nameplates for honored guests, and yet somehow mine was missing. I stood near the entrance scanning rows of white cards and gilt pens. I didn't find my name. Instead, taped to the furthest table near the kitchen hallway was a folded piece of printer paper. Black Sharpie. Additional guest. I sat. No one brought me a program. No one poured me a glass of champagne. No one asked if I was comfortable. I watched as the dean walked right past me twice without a flicker of recognition. The assistant from the admissions office, who I'd emailed 3 times confirming my attendance, was busy laughing with someone wearing pearls the size of grapes. And then I saw her. Jessica, my son's girlfriend. Her heels were higher than her GPA, and her laugh echoed like glass breaking. She was standing with her parents, Gerald and Caroline Danton, both of whom looked like a Ralph Lauren ad printed on cardboard. Gerald was leaning in close with the dean, backslapping and making sweeping arm gestures like he built the damn law school himself. I walked a little closer, hoping to catch my son's eye. That's when I heard it. Gerald, squinting past his champagne flute, muttered to the dean, "Someone should keep the cleaning staff out of the main hall. It's distracting." I stopped walking, just stood there, breathing. He was talking about me. Jessica didn't correct him. She just nodded, then giggled. She's sweet, though. I just wish Chris would help her get something new to wear. Maybe a little color. Chris wasn't there to hear it. Or maybe he was and just chose not to react. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. I turned and walked back to my table, past a line of interns snapping selfies with the university seal behind them. Past 3 more tables where proud moms dabbed their eyes with napkins as their kids rehearsed their speeches. Sat back down in my corner, unseen, uncelebrated, but not unprepared, because while they were sipping vintage Prosecco and mistaking me for the janitorial staff, I had something folded in my purse. A program. The one sent to me early by the keynote organizer. My name, printed in bold on the second-to-last page. Closing remarks. Honorable Judge Meredith Langston, United States Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit. Let them keep sipping. Let them keep underestimating me. I saw them before they saw me. Jessica's laugh has this way of slicing through a room like a bell that's been over-polished loud, sharp, meant to be noticed. She was tucked under her father's arm, all dimples and diamonds, while Gerald Danton held court with the dean like he owned the air in the room. The name Baring and Moss meant something to everyone here: senior partner, litigator of the year, donor with a building wing named after him. I knew the type. Hell, I've sentenced the type. I scanned for Chris, my son, but he was nowhere near them. Maybe still getting his robes adjusted, or maybe hiding in the bathroom trying to avoid his girlfriend's parents like he used to do before school dances when I made him wear a tie. I approached with a simple goal: greet my son, nod politely, then disappear back to the additional guest table and wait out the rest of this farce. But as I got within earshot, 3 feet from Gerald's broad back and Jessica's updo glittering like foil, I heard it. Someone should keep the cleaning staff out of the main hall. It's distracting. His voice was low but not private. It had that lazy drawl of a man who assumes everything he says is welcome. The dean laughed politely, eyes flicking in my direction, then down to his shoes. My spine didn't stiffen. My face didn't flinch. Years on the bench train that out of you. But inside, something pressed hot against my ribs. Not fury, not even surprise. Just that familiar pressure, like biting your tongue while someone calls you miss in a courtroom you built your life to sit in. Jessica didn't say anything. She glanced at me and wrinkled her nose just slightly. That subtle expression I've seen 1,000 times from girls who think their boyfriend's mom is a temporary nuisance to be endured, not respected. I let it pass. Not because I was weak, but because I already knew what they didn't. There's a kind of power that doesn't need defending. The kind that waits, lets the room talk, and then rewrites the air with one sentence. I turned, slowly, and walked toward the far end of the room. My heels made a polite clicking sound on the tile. No one followed. No one cared. I passed a row of law review students trying too hard to look impressive, one of whom actually gestured me toward a napkin spill like I might grab a rag and get to it. And for a moment, I actually pitied them. Gerald with his overcompensating bellow. Jessica with her pearls and Pinterest engagement plans. The dean with his flinching cowardice. They weren't villains. They were just people who hadn't had to learn that legacy can't be seen in shoes or speech patterns or seating charts. It's earned. And more often than not, it walks in quietly. I took my place near the back, not even pretending to look for my name this time. The server passed me without offering a refill. Across the room, Gerald started shaking hands like a man running for office. He already assumed he won. Jessica beamed, proud and unaware. And I just watched. For now. They say humiliation stings more when it's wrapped in civility. And they're right. There's no scream, no slap to brace for, just the slow burn of being politely ignored into invisibility. My seat was at the back of the ballroom, behind a column. No nameplate. Just a folding chair tucked near a stack of unused coat check tickets and a drooping floral arrangement someone had clearly decided wasn't centerpiece worthy. I double-checked the table marker, additional guest. Not even a last name. Just extra. I sat. Across the hall, cameras clicked. The dean stood near the front row, his hand firmly on Gerald Danton's shoulder as they laughed like frat brothers sharing an old war story. Chris had finally made it in, I noticed, standing a few feet off with his hands jammed into his pockets, shifting from foot to foot like he was waiting for permission to breathe. Jessica clung to his arm but was facing her father the whole time. No one brought me a program. A woman in a sequined blazer handed a stack to a row of guests near me but skipped my section altogether. The woman beside me got up and moved 2 seats down, without explanation, like I carried something she could catch. I smoothed my skirt and folded my hands in my lap. Then Gerald stepped forward to the microphone, introduced by a junior faculty member who called him one of the brightest lights in legal philanthropy. The room clapped with just the right amount of performative reverence. Gerald didn't rush. He took a moment, adjusted his French cuffs, then launched into a 10-minute speech about Jessica's childhood curiosity for justice, how at 6 she demanded equal popsicles for her brothers, how at 16 she started an Instagram account analyzing Supreme Court decisions, how she was now poised to become, quote, a voice that could shape the Constitution itself. Applause erupted. He raised a hand modestly, like a man not used to praise, but graciously accepting it. And of course, he added, as an afterthought, glancing vaguely toward the crowd behind the chandeliers, we're also proud of Chris Langston, who's done fine work and will no doubt continue to contribute in his own way. Fine work. Contribute. In his own way. The kind of language you use for someone who babysat the dog while you were busy winning awards. Jessica looked thrilled. Chris just looked at the floor. I didn't blink. Didn't shift. But my jaw felt like stone. Not because my son was overlooked, but because I realized something worse. He was getting used to it. They hadn't erased him. Or me. That would have taken effort. They'd just quietly filed us under also present, like background noise in a curated memory. I thought of the hours I'd spent reading over his essays, the mock interviews, the nights I stayed up reformatting his resume when he decided to apply to the top 10 instead of settling. The way he beamed when the acceptance letter came. The way I framed it. Myself. And now here we were. Gerald wrapped up his speech with a nod to the future. Jessica wiped a tear. People stood. Someone at my table clapped so hard the programs fluttered off the centerpiece. I didn't move, because in that moment, I understood exactly where I stood, not just in the room, but in the eyes of people who hadn't earned the right to see me in the first place. And that's when the humiliation stopped burning. Because it wasn't mine. It was theirs. They just hadn't figured it out yet. They always think silence means small. After Gerald's speech, the reception spilled into that awkward mingling hour where people hover near cheese trays and pretend they're not ranking each other's jewelry. I stayed near my seat, sipping water from a plastic flute that had a crack down one side. Across the room, Jessica was snapping photos with her father while Chris trailed behind, smiling like it was a duty. I watched him fix the back of her dress when the zipper caught. She didn't notice. She was too busy posing. Then I heard her. "Your dad's sweet," Jessica said, clinking her glass against Chris's without looking. I just wish he dressed up more. I mean, this is a law reception, not like traffic court. I didn't flinch. Didn't need to. Chris shifted. He's not really the flashy type. Gerald stepped in with that syrupy chuckle he probably uses on juries. Looks like someone managing court records, not deciding them. Jessica laughed. It was quick, almost apologetic, but it landed like a paper cut anyway. And right there, in that tiny, stupid moment, between the careless jab and the lack of correction, something in me locked into place. Not rage, not revenge. Just this clean, precise silence that sliced through all the noise. Because what Gerald didn't know, what Jessica couldn't fathom, and what even Chris seemed to have forgotten, was that the woman they'd mistaken for invisible carried more legal weight in her handbag than half this room had in their whole careers. That badge, my federal appellate judge ID, was still in my wallet, tucked next to a gum wrapper and a receipt for a dry cleaner that charged too much for pressing robes. It hadn't moved. I hadn't needed it. Not yet. Gerald, bless him, kept going. I watched him corner a clerk from the Attorney General's office and start name-dropping people I knew personally. People who'd clerked for me. People who called me Your Honor before they ever called him for lunch reservations. He dropped cases he clearly hadn't read, made a joke about liberal benches, and tossed back another flute of champagne like he owned the judicial system. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my ankles. The lights were too bright, and someone had brought out a tray of bacon-wrapped shrimp that no one seemed to touch. I watched the dean nod along to Gerald's stories and whisper something to his assistant, who then pulled out a clipboard and began taking notes. And all I kept thinking was how no one had bothered to check the name on the keynote address. They saw my flat shoes and quiet posture and assumed I was a footnote in someone else's story. A supportive parent. A background character. Maybe even catering if they were feeling generous. But they didn't know. They didn't know I'd written appellate opinions that reshaped policy. They didn't know I'd mentored judges who now ran entire circuits. They didn't know I'd been nominated by a president whose photo Gerald probably kept framed in his office like a mascot. They didn't know I'd stood in rooms with real power and walked out unshaken. They didn't know. Jessica floated by again, holding a white clutch and laughing at something Gerald whispered. She didn't make eye contact. Didn't even register me. Like I was just furniture in her night's aesthetic. And I sat there, letting them believe it. Letting the tension coil, soft and cold and precise, just behind my ribs. Because silence isn't insignificance. Silence is strategy. The lights started shifting, and I could feel the room rearranging itself like a theater set. 1 minute, people were grazing at dessert trays. The next, they were forming polite lines in front of a step and repeat banner printed with the law school's crest and a list of its biggest donors. A hired photographer stood on a small platform, snapping shots every 7 seconds while an assistant adjusted ties and jackets like it mattered what your pocket square said about your GPA. Families moved up in packs, parents, siblings, the occasional godparent flown in for the occasion. Each one posed with the dean and a few carefully selected law firm reps, mostly donors like Baring and Moss, eager to be photographed next to future billable hours. I stood near the edge of the line, not pushing forward, not asking for anything, just watching, waiting. Jessica and Gerald made their way to the front like royalty gliding through a crowd of peasants. Her mother fluffed Jessica's curls just before the photo, while Gerald smoothed his collar and said something that made the photographer laugh too hard to be genuine. Chris followed a few steps behind, clearly uncomfortable in the parade, but still showing up because that's what we taught him to do. Be present. Be respectful. I caught his eye for half a second. He opened his mouth, maybe to say something, maybe just to signal that he saw me, but before he could, a student volunteer stepped between us. "Oh, sorry, sir," she said, hand out like I might walk onto the set and ruin the symmetry. "Let's keep this frame clean. This group is already full." She said it kindly, like I was a coat that didn't match the aesthetic. Like letting me into the picture would smudge the polish they'd so carefully arranged. Chris looked frozen. His hands were at his sides, jaw slack, eyes darting from the volunteer to me, then back to the ground. He didn't say anything. He didn't stop her. He just stood there. I nodded once and stepped back. Not angry, not embarrassed. Just disappointed in a way that doesn't move or scream. The kind of disappointment that makes your chest feel too full to inhale properly. Gerald put his arm around Jessica, pulled her in tight like he'd already adopted her whole future. The dean grinned wide, showing too many teeth. The flash popped. My son stood in the middle, tucked between two legacies that hadn't earned it, next to a woman who didn't know what she'd thrown away, and a man who thought the bench was only for the powerful and well-dressed. No one noticed I was gone. No one asked me to step in. The next group was already moving forward. Someone ushered me further back as if I were blocking the flow. I found a quiet corner near a potted fern and a low speaker playing instrumental jazz. From there, I could see the whole room. The fake laughter. The carefully constructed illusions. The law firm reps pretending to remember names. The professors trying not to sweat through their suits. And in the center of it all, my son still not speaking, still not moving. That stung more than Gerald ever could. Because Gerald was a cartoon. Jessica was a chapter. But Chris, he was my blood. My boy. And in that moment, he didn't reach for me. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he didn't want to disrupt the version of his life that fit so neatly into a photo. Maybe he thought I'd understand. And I did. But that didn't mean it didn't break something. Not loudly. Just quietly. In a way that would never quite fit back the same. The dean stepped up to the mic just as dessert was being cleared. Spoons clinked against glass, half-empty wine glasses tilted lazily in hands, and people shifted in their seats like they were prepping to zone out. You could feel the collective attention start to sag. The keynote had been listed as TBA on the programs, a last-minute switch from some federal litigator out of D.C. who had a conflict arise. No one cared much. These speeches were usually filler, background music before the final champagne toast. The dean fumbled with the mic until it crackled to life, then cleared his throat like it might boost his authority. "And now," he said, glancing at a card in his hand, clearly unfamiliar with what he was about to read, "please welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Judge Meredith Langston of the United States Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit." The air in the room changed like a needle drop. For a full beat, nobody moved. Jessica's hand stopped mid-sip. Her father lowered his glass so slowly it looked choreographed. The dean blinked at the mic like it had betrayed him. Then I stood, deliberate, smooth, no rush. I adjusted the sleeve of my suit, navy, still, and walked forward through the maze of stunned silence. Chairs squeaked as people half rose out of reflex, unsure if they should clap or gasp. The student who'd told me to keep the frame clean let out a tiny, strangled noise. The volunteer at the door turned a new shade of red. Chris was the only one who didn't move. Gerald's jaw tightened as if he'd just realized the steering wheel wasn't in his hands anymore. Jessica, still holding her wine, turned to Chris and whispered, just loud enough for the table to hear, "That's your dad." Chris didn't answer. I reached the podium, nodded once to the dean, who looked like he might throw up into his university-issued name badge, and turned to face the room. All of them. The donors. The professors. The polished parents with their legacy pins and trust fund portfolios. My voice didn't tremble. "Good evening," I said, letting the silence stretch for half a breath. "It's an honor to be here tonight with the future minds of law, the people who will one day shape policy, argue precedent, and, if they're lucky, understand the responsibility that comes with real power." I saw Gerald's expression shift from surprise to something harder to name, like he'd just walked into a room and seen his reflection for the first time. Jessica wouldn't look at me. Her smile had vanished, replaced by the stiff mask of someone whose social math no longer added up. The applause came late, hesitant at first, then stronger. But it didn't matter, because this wasn't about the clapping. This was about the moment the room remembered me, the moment the narrative broke open, the moment the additional guest at table 11, the one in the old shoes, without a program, mistaken for cleaning staff, stepped behind the podium as the highest-ranking official in the building. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd defined me by absence, by quiet, by a suit that didn't sparkle and a chair near the back. And now I had the mic. And it was time to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform. I just spoke. About legacy, not the kind written in bronze on the side of a law building, but the kind you leave in the hearts of people no one photographs. About justice, not as a podium or prestige project, but as a daily discipline. About humility. About restraint. About the strength it takes to stay quiet in rooms that mistake silence for submission. I talked about students, how they come in hungry, unsure, often imitating what they think success looks like until someone tells them the truth. That this field, this robe, this bench, it doesn't reward showmanship. It rewards discipline. It rewards decency. It rewards those who listen hardest when they don't have the floor. I made them laugh once, softly, when I described my first time in a courtroom and how I mispronounced residential judicata during oral arguments. The tension in the room cracked just enough to breathe. Then I paused. I looked out over the crowd, paused a second time, let the silence land. And then I turned my head slowly, deliberately, toward Gerald. I didn't need to raise a finger or call a name. They all followed my eyes. "It matters," I said, clear and even, "how we treat the people we think can do nothing for us." The silence that followed was different. Not stunned, not confused, just pierced. Like someone had turned on a light in a room full of people who'd grown comfortable in the dark. Jessica sat motionless, her hand clutching her wine glass like it might anchor her to a version of the evening that no longer existed. Her face was pale, lips parted slightly, like she was waiting for someone else to start talking, so she could join in and pretend she understood what was happening. Chris looked down. He didn't hide it well. He swallowed hard and blinked twice. Maybe ashamed, maybe relieved, maybe realizing the weight of all the tiny silences he'd let pass unchallenged. Gerald just stared, tight-lipped, stiff. His hand had slipped from Jessica's shoulder at some point, and now it just rested in his lap, twitching slightly. I saw something flicker behind his eyes, not shame, not quite, but the unfamiliar panic of a man watching a story he thought he'd written get ripped away mid-sentence. Scattered claps started. Not many. A few professors. One of the junior students in the front. Then more. But some people didn't move. They didn't know whether to applaud or pretend they'd been listening all along. I didn't need the ovation. The moment had already done its work. I nodded once. Thank you, I said, and stepped back from the mic. And in that second, between my voice fading and the applause catching, it was crystal clear. Every assumption made tonight had just been rewritten. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I never had to prove anything at all. The moment I stepped off that stage, the silence shattered. A professor I didn't recognize, Ty Askew, eyes wide, rushed forward, hand outstretched. Judge Langston, he stammered, is there any chance we could get a transcript of your remarks? For the newsletter, for the archives. His face was flushed, either from embarrassment or adrenaline. I handed him my printed copy without a word. He clutched it like scripture. Then came the students. Not the ones who'd ignored me earlier, but the newer ones, the ones still raw around the edges. They came shyly at first, asking if they could take a quick picture if I'd sign their programs. One of them told me she wanted to clerk someday, but never thought someone like her from my kind of background, she said, would belong in federal courtrooms. You do, I told her. You already do. They kept coming. A little braver. A little louder. Across the room, I caught sight of the dean speed-walking toward me, his name badge bouncing like a nervous heartbeat. Judge Langston, I want to personally apologize, he said, hands fluttering near his chest. There was a mix-up in our seating chart and the program printing. I mean, had I known you were on site earlier, we would have. It's all right, I said, cutting gently but firmly. You're not the first man to miss what's right in front of him. He froze, smile faltering. Before he could stammer a reply, Gerald appeared like a man on damage control. He approached with a forced grin and outstretched hand like the evening hadn't just folded in half. Well played, he said. Tone somewhere between admiration and discomfort. I only wish you'd spoken up earlier. You could have avoided all that awkwardness. I tilted my head, just slightly, then met his eyes like I was flipping a switch. You could have read the guest list, I said. The grin slipped. Just a hair. Enough to register. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I stepped around him. Smoothly. No hesitation. And that's when Chris fell into step beside me. He didn't say much at first. Just walked with me down the carpeted hall that led toward the main exit. He looked a little different now. Quieter. Like he was still recalibrating every word he hadn't said. Every moment he'd flinched instead of fought. We passed the coat racks. He reached for mine before I could. You knew this would happen, he said finally, his voice not accusatory, just stunned. I looked at him, the face I'd helped mold. The boy who once asked me what a subpoena was at age 8. The man who'd forgotten, for a little while, what his mother carried quietly. I didn't know, I answered. I just waited long enough for them to show me who they were. He nodded, eyes on the floor. When we stepped outside, the air had that first bite of late spring crisp, with just enough breeze to remind you that seasons change whether people are ready or not. I stood there a moment, letting it hit me, because this wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about some grand speech or clapback headline. This was about time, and how sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's a loaded pause before the verdict lands. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived tucked inside a larger manila envelope from the university registrar. It looked like any other formal application packet, structured, stiff, professionally dull, but I knew that handwriting the moment I saw it. Chris still made his capital GS like he was drawing football goalposts. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where I used to help him build Lego courthouses and correct his grammar on thank you notes. The envelope sat in front of me for a while. I made a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Let the kettle whistle a little longer than needed. Let the quiet stretch until it didn't feel like silence anymore, just space. Then I opened it. Inside was the full application. A neatly printed cover letter addressed to the Honorable Judge Meredith Langston. His resume. His writing sample from the moot court finals I hadn't attended, he hadn't invited me. There were recommendation letters from professors I'd mentored before they ever had tenure. And at the very back, in handwriting that looked steadier than I expected, was a small note clipped to the last page. If you'll still have me, it read, I'd be honored to learn from you. No grand apology. No excuse. Just acknowledgement. Just a son remembering who raised him and finally realizing the value of that memory. I held that note longer than I held the rest of it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fireworks. It was better. It was humility. I circled the date in red ink. Then I signed it. My clerk. My son. The same boy who once asked if judges got magic gavels and whether I was allowed to wear mine at home. The one who'd told his fifth-grade class his mom bossed lawyers around for a living and came home beaming when I'd shown up on career day in my robe, carrying a stuffed manila folder labeled Truth. He forgot for a while. That's life. That's growth. It's easy to get dazzled when the world throws pearls at your feet and tells you that you've earned them. But eventually, if you're lucky, you remember who taught you to walk barefoot. And now, on my office wall next to degrees and citations and more plaques than I ever cared to hang, there's a new addition. Not a certificate. Not a photo. Just a handwritten note clipped inside a plain manila folder, stored next to his application. Legacy isn't loud. It's quiet paper. Signed, sealed, and seen. There's a photo on my office wall now, tucked between my circuit appointment certificate and a framed editorial clipping from the Times, nothing flashy, just a quiet record of a moment that mattered more than I expected. It wasn't taken by the event photographer. No, that man was too busy capturing the polished smiles of donors and curated families lined up for their scripted moments. This one came from a second-year student I'd never met. She emailed it to my chambers 3 days after the reception with a subject line that just said, "Thought you might want this." No filter. No lighting rig. Just raw timing. It caught me mid-sentence behind the podium, my right hand gesturing lightly, my expression steady, calm. In the foreground, there's a sea of frozen faces. But it's the back corner of the frame that gets me every time. Jessica, seated, head tilted, lips parted in disbelief. Like someone had just told her the world wasn't flat. Gerald, mid-scoff, mouth half open, eyes narrowing as if realizing just then how thoroughly he'd miscalculated. His daughter wasn't the only star in that room. And he wasn't the brightest man near the podium. But it's Chris who pulls the whole thing together. He's standing. Not for attention. Just because something inside him had finally told him to rise. His tie's a little crooked, his brows furrowed, and he's not looking at the audience or at his girlfriend or even at the camera. He's looking at me. Not through me. Not past me. At me. Really seeing, for the first time in years, who I am and maybe who I've always been. There's no applause in the frame. No caption. No plaque. But when people step into my office and pause in front of it, they always ask the same thing. What was happening in that moment? And I just smile. Because in that single photo, unposed, unexpected, is the entire arc of that night. The woman they mistook for catering? She was the keynote. The mother they dismissed like an old coat? She was the one who built the courtroom. They misjudged the janitor. They met the judge. And for once, they didn't need a robe or a gavel to know the difference.